An early morning attack.
In 2012, it will be 200 years since in this part of the world where we were known as Upper Canada and First Nations territories, soldiers, civilians, and warriors died to defend against an aggressive act. It will be 200 years of peace in 2014 between us and the United States. The borders between us were defined from that moment until the present, lest we not forget those that died then for our future and collective freedom. 111 years since we first marched to war as a nation. 117,000 killed in action. That's nearly the population of Brantford and Brant County. On average, these figures represent nearly 3 military deaths each and every day of each and every year since 1899. Then there are the wounded, wounded of body, wounded of mind, and all the trauma which was left with their family. Thousands upon thousands of lives, battered and torn, physically and emotionally, never to be the same again. They were called, and they answered. They came from all walks of life, rich and poor, short and tall, married and single, from every province. They came, they trained, they shipped out. They were going to war. They were sent to places with strange exotic names: Vimy Ridge, Ypres, Hong Kong, Dieppe, Monte Cassino, Falaise, and Kandahar. Sites that became Canadian battles, Canadian triumphs, Canadian defeats. Names that have entered the military lexicon of lessons learned, and sometimes relearned. Names that reflect the history of a nation at war, not for the sake of war, but for the sake of peace.
Today, we see a tolerant, wealthy, freedom-loving society that has several times earned its spurs among the nations of the world, pointed to by many as the best of all the countries in which to live. Thanks to the sacrifice of those who fought the big battles of the past, our task is getting easier. Then perhaps the guns can at last be truly silent. Today, in remembrance of all the lives forfeited and all the lives altered by the wars that have been waged during the short life of this country we call Canada. As you watch this presentation, look to your left and look to your right, and just think of how it must have been, through all these wars. People, the same age as us, of all countries, were torn away, and were not so much asked, but told that you may likely die by having to go and defend your country's aggressive acts.
Even though this area was occupied after the American Revolution, which ended in 1783, the War of 1812 really defined our borders, and they remained from that time up until now virtually unchanged. So the War of 1812 defined our countries, our territories, and of course it took wars, unfortunately, to define those territories as they are defined. And along with that, there were veterans back then. That connection for us historically runs back 200 years to the Canada and the First Nations territories that we live in and amongst today. Commemorating our collective veterans, not only from Canada, Britain, the United States, Polish War veterans, but for sure commemorating our Haudenosaunee, Six Nations, Iroquois War veterans.
About Remembrance Day, I think about my grandfather Duggan. He was 19 years old when he went to fight in the First World War. So he was like barely out of high school, right? He's just a boy, really. And off he goes to fight in this war. He came home a few years later injured, really badly injured. He was near a landmine that exploded, and he ended up with shrapnel in his leg. And until the day he died, when he was in his 90s, that shrapnel gave him problems. It was unbelievable, the suffering that went on and on and on. And he was able to function, but there were periods of time when his leg, he was bedridden. It was terrible. And he did all of that because he really believed that it was his job to go and to fight for our country. And so on Remembrance Day, I think about my grandfather and what he sacrificed. I mean, today a 19-year-old Canadian would be partying and having fun with his buddies on the weekend, going and fighting in a war. It's just such an unbelievable thing that he did.
None of us really knew until we actually got into the active area just what we were facing. But having some experience with the stories your father told you from the First World War, you kind of had an idea what you were going to get involved in. And still, when you really got into war itself, it was still a shock to accept the situations that you became in. I think it's highly important that the youth, as they grow up, become aware of the important aspects of Canada war situations. The populace has it as years roll by. It's not important anymore. But if you got to stop to think, and if you look at the memorial all across the country from coast to coast, the names that are on those memorials, most of them were young, very young people who never got the opportunity to raise a family and were killed and dead and that sort of thing. That's the kind of what you've got to have in mind all the time. I see the faces of people that died, and I know they're no longer here. That kind of thing goes through my mind. And also it's important to me that the ceremony be run properly. So I get involved in that part of it to make sure that everything goes properly, but I generally cry too. Of course, over the years, mind you, most of them have passed away, but locally I have known most of the Polish veterans. And more besides that. As I've traveled around with the Legion and going into different legions. For instance, there's a Polish legion in Hamilton, and there's one in St. Catharines, and there's some up through the north of Polish veterans. You got to remember too that now most of them are either in their really late 80s and early 90s, so that they have passed on. But over the years, I've known many Polish veterans, great fighters. When they went into battle, they knew what they were doing, and they did a good job. And on top of that, they also supplied a lot of Polish pilots that flew the Spitfires and for the British RAF too. And I guess the expression would be that they were good soldiers and they fought the good fight.
I was with 3rd Battalion, the Royal Canadian Regiment, with Mike Company, 4 platoon, and I was a rifleman on the ground with the battle group. So my job consisted of patrolling, and told to go somewhere we would. And the general security of the area, like we were close security for a lot of the outlying villages around our FOB, which is a forward operating base, a camp. Remembrance Day to me is a time to reflect on the sacrifices that not only did the World War II and World War I and Korean vets, but the sacrifices that Canadians are still making today.
And I met the veterans who used to come to our school to talk to our grade 10 students. And at that time, we did it over the PA system, and I remember that day standing beside the vet and crying because I thought there has to be a better way to do this. And so the school and I decided that we would honor them by holding a Remembrance Day service. And this is the one that will happen this year at St. John's, and it has happened for the past, I'm not sure, but 12, 13 years. And I honor the vets because, like Jesus, they're the only other people I know that would actually give up their life for the lives of others and for the well-being of others. And so my respect is deep for them because of that ultimate sacrifice that many human beings can't make. And as I said, I don't think I'd be able to make. So it gives me great privilege to know that I have been part of their lives, that we celebrate them, most importantly, that we never forget. And I think this video will continue to celebrate the memories and to celebrate the importance that they have in our lives.
Just don't forget. Just don't forget.
I'm of Dutch descent, so there was a lot of, we had a lot of, my grandparents and stuff were actually involved in the war, and there's a lot of atrocities and different things that they had to endure. A lot of them keep it secret. I know it's near and dear to my heart in terms of that we can't forget Remembrance Day. We have to remember that a lot of people paid a lot, especially with their lives, in terms of keeping our freedom, and especially in Canada today. A lot of the Canadians went and helped out in the war. They did their best, and they were able to help accomplish a lot in the war. In terms of the police service, I know we every year go down to the cenotaph in Brantford, and we help to commemorate and to remember those that that fell in the war and that lost their lives, and we have to make sure we have to remember that and keep that going.
Anyone concerned about our soldiers that have fought for the freedom of this country, the ones that have fallen, the ones that have fought and returned home, it's a very somber time as far as I'm concerned. It's a time when everybody should stop and reflect of what these men have gone through and what they are going through now. And I think everyone should be very appreciative of it.